So silver, right? If you're here, you're probably wondering what happened to silver prices.
Yeah.
Especially over like April 3rd and 4th.
Yeah, a pretty big drop.
It was. And, the question we're going to try to answer today is, was that just like a panic sell, or was something else going on? We've got some sources here that we're going to dig into to try to get to the bottom of this silver slide.
Yeah, and I think what we can start with is, if we look at everything kind of goes back to this announcement on April 2nd from the U.S. government about these new tariffs that are coming into effect.
Tariffs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the big tariff announcement.
Right. And it wasn't just, a small tariff here or there. It was a really wide sweeping, kind of across the board 10% tariff.
10% across the board. Wow.
Yeah, and even higher for some specific countries, like China, the EU, Vietnam, Taiwan, India. They all got hit with even higher rates as a way to address trade imbalances.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a pretty big deal, right?
It is a big deal. It was a very, pretty significant policy shift, and the markets kind of reacted accordingly.
Well, yeah, the equity markets definitely reacted.
Oh, yeah.
The S&P 500 had its worst day since 2020. Down almost 5%.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's a huge drop. So, anytime you see that kind of risk aversion in the markets, it's going to have an impact, and it definitely had an impact on precious metals and silver in particular.
Right. And then if we look at the silver price action specifically, right on April 3rd, we see that silver prices tumbled pretty hard. They landed somewhere around $32.01 an ounce.
32 is a one.
Right, which is a drop of about 6%.
6%.
So yeah, pretty substantial move there.
And it kept going down.
It did. On April 4th, it kept going down. And yeah, I know there's a little bit of variation depending on, where you get your data from. But looking across our sources, it looks like it was somewhere between, $2.26 and $2.46 that it dropped, which percentage-wise is about another 7% off.
Another 7%.
Yeah.
So a pretty significant two-day slide for silver.
It is. Yeah, it is.
So what happened? What's the story here?
So there's this interesting little wrinkle that we have to look at. So everyone expected, based on the announcement, that these tariffs would include silver, right? That silver imports would be part of this whole thing.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. But they specifically exempted bullion.
Really?
Which includes silver.
Wow.
So that expected, lug in demand that a lot of people were probably expecting just never materialized.
I see.
So it's quite possible that some traders who had been betting on those tariffs on silver then unwound their positions, contributing to this drop.
Okay. So, we talk a lot on the show about how leverage works in the silver market.
Right.
We have things like futures contracts, options, CFDs. So can you remind us how leverage plays into all of this?
Right. So leverage is basically, this way for traders to get exposure to a lot more silver than they might actually have the capital for, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it can work both ways, right? It can really amplify gains, but it can also really amplify your losses. And when you have price volatility, like we saw after this tariff announcement, people using leverage might get what's called a margin call.
Margin call.
Yeah, meaning they have to put up more money to cover their position. And if they can't, then they're forced to sell. Which then obviously drives the price down even further.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a vicious cycle.
It is. And the silver market, it's not as big as some of the other markets out there. So it's especially sensitive to this kind of leverage trading activity.
So was it, the kind of $1 million question here, was this a panic sell? Was this just a bunch of people freaking out and selling off all at once?
So we don't have the, exact figures for silver liquidations, but I can tell you that we did see that there was definitely a lot of deleveraging happening across all the markets.
Deleveraging.
Yeah, so investors were definitely looking to reduce the amount of borrowed money that they had out there. And that includes, the gold market as well, not just silver.
Got it.
So it definitely seems like, the tariff announcement was that first domino to fall.
Okay.
It shook things up, led to those margin calls, and then we saw people in the silver market selling off to cover their positions.
So maybe not pure panic, but definitely a reaction to the tariff announcement.
Right. Exactly.
And the silver wasn't the only market, taking a hit, right?
Not at all. It was really widespread. Gold was also down, although not as much as silver.
Mm-hmm.
And then we saw some of those industrial metals like platinum and palladium also falling.
Why those?
Well, it kind of reflects concerns about what's going to happen with economic activity in the future.
Oh,
Right. Because if the economy slows down, you're going to need less of those industrial metals.
makes sense.
And then we even saw some pretty big drops in crude oil and copper.
Copper, that's the big one, right?
Yeah, copper's a big one. I mean, a lot of people watch copper prices because it's a pretty good indicator of where the overall economy might be headed.
So a drop in copper is kind of bad news.
It can be. It's definitely, a warning sign that we might be heading for a recession.
Okay.
And so I think all of this together just really underscores the impact of those tariffs.
It does. So, we've talked about the kind of the broad market impact of these tariffs. But what about silver itself? Like, was there any bad news coming out from the big silver producers? Or was there like a sudden drop in demand that maybe we didn't know about?
It's interesting. From what I can see in our sources there wasn't anything really, any specific negative news that we can point to from the major silver mining companies. And in fact, if we go back to the forecasts from earlier this year, they were actually predicting a deficit in the silver market in 2025.
A deficit.
Yeah, because industrial demand was so strong.
I see.
So it seems like those positive fundamentals are still there.
Okay.
It's just that, the tariff news was such a short-term shock to the market that it really overshadowed everything else.
Right, right. So, looking across all of our sources, it sounds like the general consensus is that the U.S. tariffs are the primary driver of this silver price decline.
Yeah, that's pretty much the takeaway here. I mean, you have that bullion exemption that we talked about. You have all this general nervousness in the markets, and then you have, that sensitivity to industrial demand that silver has.
Mm-hmm.
And then you probably also have, a bit of technical selling on top of all that.
Technical selling, yeah.
Yeah. But, the interesting thing is that a lot of the experts still seem to be pretty bullish on silver in the long run. Yeah. They're still pointing to those strong fundamentals, like industrial demand and those potential supply deficits. So this might just be a temporary dip.
A temporary dip.
Yeah. Time will tell.
Time will tell. All right, so to kind of bring it all together for everyone listening, it seems like that U.S. tariff announcement on April 2nd, that was the main trigger for the silver price drop. It wasn't necessarily just panic selling, but it was a broader reaction to this news.
Absolutely.
And then, we had those, kind of leverage effects and that unexpected bullion exemption.
Right. All those things kind of piled on.
Yeah, it all kind of snowballed.
Yeah.
So those tariffs really sent shockwaves through all the markets. People got spooked, and then we saw liquidations.
Yeah, pretty much.
Including in silver. Wow. It's really fascinating how quickly these big global events can impact specific markets like silver.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, I think this really shows how connected our financial world is.
Yeah.
You might think that, something like a tariff announcement wouldn't have much impact on silver prices. But
It can.
it definitely can. So, yeah, keep an eye on those macroeconomic policies because they really can have ripple effects in all sorts of unexpected places.
Yeah, good advice.
All right, that's it for our silver deep dive today. We'll catch you on the next one.